The wind howled through the jagged peaks, carrying with it the biting chill of approaching winter. Inside a small cabin nestled deep within the mountains, a single candle flickered against the shadows that clung to the rough wooden walls. The fire sputtered in the hearth, casting uneasy light over the tense figures gathered around the crude table. The mountain man was a towering presence, his frame hardened by years of solitude and labor. His beard was thick and tangled, his eyes sharp and unyielding like the crags surrounding them. There was a roughness about him that spoke of survival. A man who answered only to the wild. Across from him sat a woman, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her eyes, wide and wary, flickered with a mixture of fear and defiance. She was a stranger to this harsh world, but desperation had brought her here, to the edge of something she could neither fully understand nor refuse. "You must understand," the mountain man said, his voice low and gravelly. "This is no ordinary agreement. Until my sons come into the world, your body is mine. No questions, no hesitations." The woman swallowed hard, the words crashing over her like an icy wave. She'd heard stories, whispers about this man and the savage bargains he made, but she never imagined she'd be the one caught in his grasp. She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Because the land demands it," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Because without them, without my sons, this mountain will swallow me whole. They are the future, my bloodline. And you are the vessel." Her mind raced, trying to grasp the gravity of his words. She had nowhere else to turn. No family, no friends, no refuge beyond this cold wilderness. And yet, the price was more than she ever imagined. He slid a worn leather pouch across the table. "This is your payment. Enough to last until spring. Enough to buy you some semblance of life here. But remember, the bargain is binding." She stared at the pouch, at the few coins inside. It was paltry, but it might mean the difference between life and death. She nodded slowly, the weight of her decision settling over her like the first frost outside. "Then it is settled," the mountain man said, standing abruptly. His shadow stretched long across the floor. "Come with me. We have no time to waste." The woman rose, her limbs stiff and reluctant. As they stepped outside, the wind whipped around them, a reminder of the unforgiving world they now both belonged to. The mountain loomed over them, ancient, and indifferent. In its shadow, a pact was forged. One that would bind two lives together in ways neither could yet foresee. Before the cold mountain winds swallowed her whole, before the unforgiving peaks became her prison, the woman had known a life far different, though no less brutal. Her name was Ilara, born in a small village at the edge of a sprawling forest. Her childhood was stitched together by fragments of laughter and loss. Her father, a stern but loving man, had worked the land tirelessly, while her mother's gentle hands tended their meager garden and healed the sick. But peace was fragile, a thin veneer over deeper shadows. When Ilara was just 15, war came, the kind that doesn't make it into the songs or tales told by firesides. The war that steals the innocent and leaves nothing but ash in its wake. One night, the village was razed by marauders, flames consuming everything in their path. Ilara fled into the dark woods, the screams of her family swallowed by the roaring blaze. She ran until her legs gave out, until her breath became ragged, and then she kept running. The forest swallowed her like a ghost, hiding her from the chaos she had left behind. For months, she drifted from one forgotten place to another. A wandering band of outcasts took her in briefly, but mistrust festered between them. Hunger gnawed at her bones. Nights were the worst, filled with cold and the haunting echoes of what she had lost. It was during one of those endless nights that she heard whispers of the mountain man, a creature of myth and dread. They said he ruled the peaks with a cruel hand, that he demanded sacrifices, that his bargains were binding beyond death. Ilara had no choice. The wild no longer held refuge, and the lowlands were tainted with memories she couldn't bear to face. The mountain was a last hope, or a final damnation. When she finally arrived at the foot of the peaks, battered and broken, she met the mountain man not with awe, but with wary eyes that had seen too much. Her body bore the marks of her past, scars and bruises she tried to hide, but they told the story of a woman who had fought to survive. She had learned the hard way that trust was a currency rarer than gold, and more dangerous than the sharpest blade. The mountain man had looked at her with a cold appraisal that made her skin crawl. Yet beneath that hardness, she glimpsed a hint of something else, a desperate need that mirrored her own. When he proposed the bargain, her body in exchange for shelter and sustenance until his sons were born, Ilara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. But as the words settled in her mind, she realized this was her path, the only path. The price was terrifying. The bargain was more than a contract. It was a chain wrapped tight around her soul. but it was also survival. In the stillness of the mountain cabin, memories of her past clung to her like a second skin. The faces of those she had lost haunted her, her parents, her village, the life that might have been. She thought of the small village church where she had once dreamed of a future. Beyond hardship, a dream shattered by fire and blood. And yet, in the shadow of the mountain, something new was taking root, fear mixed with a fragile hope, dread tangled with a fierce will to endure. The bargain had marked the beginning of a new chapter, but Alara knew the mountain held more secrets than she could guess. The mountain man was no mere beast of legend. He was a man shaped by darkness, driven by a need that twisted their fates together. Her past was a weight she carried silently, a reminder of everything she had lost. But it was also the reason she clung so fiercely to the thin thread of life the mountain man's bargain offered. For now, she would survive. For now, she would endure. But deep inside, the fire that had been extinguished long ago began to flicker again, quiet, steady, waiting for the moment it could roar back to life. The mountain was merciless. Its cold, rocky face seemed to press in on them from every direction, its vastness swallowing the cabin like a speck in a frozen wasteland. Each morning, Alara woke to the relentless howl of the wind and the piercing light of dawn, struggling to push through the narrow window. The bargain she had made with the mountain man was no longer just words. It had become her daily reality. From dawn until dusk, she was bound by the unyielding rules of this bleak place and the man who ruled it. Her days began before the first light. The mountain man, whom she had come to know as Bram, rose without complaint, his rough hands tending to the fire and the animals they kept. Bram was a creature of habit and solitude, shaped by the unforgiving environment and his own dark past. Alara moved carefully, learning the rhythms of mountain life. The cold seeped into her bones, a constant reminder that she was a stranger here. But with each task, fetching water from the frozen stream, chopping wood, preparing meager meals, she grew stronger, more attuned to the savage beauty around her. Bram watched her with an inscrutable expression, rarely speaking unless necessary. When he did, his words were blunt but precise. "You learn fast," he remarked one morning, his voice gruff yet tinged with a rare note of approval. Alara nodded, though the ache of exhaustion pulled at her limbs. Survival demanded everything, and the bargain tethered her to this place like a chain. At night, the cabin was both a refuge and a prison. The fire's glow illuminated Bram's harsh features, casting shadows that danced on the walls. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken tension and wary glances. The terms of the bargain weighed heavily on Alara's mind. Bram's sons were not yet born, but the expectation hung over her like a storm cloud. Until they came into the world, she was his, not by choice, but by necessity. Despite the bleakness, moments of fragile humanity slipped through the cracks. Sometimes, Bram would speak of the mountain in a softer tone, recalling legends and memories buried beneath the rugged exterior. One evening, as a snowstorm raged outside, Bram shared a story of his father, a man who had ruled these peaks before him, bound by the same code of survival and bloodline. Alara listened, captivated by the glimpse of vulnerability beneath his harsh demeanor. "I don't want to lose them," Bram confessed quietly, staring into the fire. "They are the only thing that makes this mountain bearable." Her heart ached for the man who bore such loneliness, trapped by his own desperation. But beneath the sympathy was a cold reality. The bargain was a prison neither of them could escape. Days blurred into weeks, each marked by the endless cycle of labor and silence. Alara's body, once fragile and broken, grew strong and resilient, yet her spirit wrestled with the chains of the bargain. The loss of freedom, a constant torment. She found solace in the small things: a rare bird's song, the brief touch of sunlight on snow, the faint heartbeat of hope that maybe, someday, the mountain would release her. But the mountain was patient, and so was Bram. The bargain was not just about survival, it was about legacy, blood, and a future forged in the shadow of ancient stone. Alara knew the bargain was far from over. The sons must be born. Until then, her body was his, her will bent but not broken. And in the endless silence of the mountain, two souls bound by fear and necessity waited for the dawn. Winter tightened its grip on the mountain, the cold turning everything brittle and sharp. Inside the cabin, the fire's glow flickered against the wooden walls, casting long shadows that danced with the quiet urgency of new life. Alara's body ached in ways it never had before. The bargain, once a distant threat, had become a living reality. She carried Bram's sons within her, the weight of them pressed heavily on her, an unyielding bond forged in pain, fear, and reluctant hope. Days bled into nights, as Alara's condition worsened. Bram, usually a man of few words, grew restless and protective, a strange tenderness breaking through his hardened exterior. He watched over her with fierce intensity, his usual cold gaze softened by something almost human. The birth was violent and raw. Primal struggle against the harshness of the mountain and the fragility of life itself. Alara screamed into the night, the sharp cry tearing through the stillness like a blade. Bram held her, his rough hands steadying her trembling body. When the first son came into the world, a fragile, wailing bundle, something inside Bram broke. Freya, cry not of a beast, but of a father. Then came the second, smaller but equally fierce, his tiny fists curling into the coarse blanket that swaddled him. The mountain seemed to hold its breath as life emerged from the cold grip of winter. Alara lay back, exhausted and broken, yet a quiet pride stirred within her. The bargain was fulfilled, at least for this chapter. Bram's sons were alive, their bloodlines secured. For a moment, there was peace and unspoken truce in the cabin's dim light. Bram looked at Alara with something approaching gratitude, though the shadow of the bargain still lingered between them. "You did well," he muttered, voice rough but sincere. Alara nodded weakly, the pain ebbing but not gone. She had survived the ordeal, but the future remained uncertain. The sons were the mountain man's legacy, but what would become of her now that her debt had been paid? Days passed, and the cabin filled with the fragile sounds of new life, the soft coos of infants, the rustle of blankets, the creak of tired limbs. Bram's world had changed, but the mountains still loomed, indifferent and eternal. Alara found herself torn between relief and dread. The bargain had bound her body, but not her spirit. The sons were a bridge to freedom, or a new chain tightening around her. Bram began to speak more, his words slower, weighted with the gravity of their shared ordeal. "They will grow strong," he said quietly, "stronger than me. This mountain will not claim them." Alara watched him, a man carved by hardship but softened by hope. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something like tenderness in his eyes, not just for the sons, but for her. And yet, the bargain's shadow was far from lifted. The mountain demanded more than just sons. It demanded loyalty, sacrifice, and obedience. Alara's nights were restless. Her mind churned with questions of what freedom could truly mean. Would Bram honor the terms? Would the sons change everything, or deepen the darkness? In the silence between them, a fragile understanding grew, a tentative truce forged not from love, but from shared survival. As the first snow melted and the promise of spring whispered through the mountain air, Alara held the sons close, feeling the pulse of life beneath her hands. The bargain had come to a turning point. But the mountain was patient, and the story far from over. The mountain had a way of hiding things, secrets buried beneath layers of rock and snow, truths tangled in shadows as dense as the forest that clung to its base. Bram and Alara had survived the harshest winter, but beneath the brittle calm lay currents neither dared speak aloud. One evening, as a storm raged beyond the cabin walls, Alara watched Bram sit by the fire, staring into the flames with a haunted look. The sons slept peacefully nearby, oblivious to the weight their existence carried. "Why me?" she finally asked, breaking the silence that had grown too thick to bear. "Why did you choose me for the bargain?" Bram's eyes flickered with a dark memory, his voice rough but steady. "Because you are strong. Because the mountain demands more than just sons, it demands survival through blood and will." Alara's mind raced. There was more to Bram's story than the harsh mountain man he showed the world. "Your father," she began cautiously. "He ruled these peaks before you. What happened to him?" Bram's jaw tightened. "He was betrayed, killed by those who feared his power. I swore the same wouldn't happen to my bloodline." The sons were not just heirs, they were a legacy that Bram would protect at any cost, even if it meant making a bargain that bound another's life to his own. But Bram's secrets ran deeper still. One night, Alara discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of the cabin. Inside lay letters, worn and yellowed with age, written in a shaky hand, his mother's. Her words told a tale of love and loss, of a family torn apart by greed and violence. Bram's lineage was cursed, marked by betrayal and a desperate hunger for power that had turned his ancestors into shadows of men. "Alara, read the letters by candlelight," the flickering flame illuminating the pain and fear etched in every word. Bram was not just a mountain man, he was a man haunted by ghosts he couldn't escape. But Alara had her own secrets. The bargain had forced her to wear a mask of compliance, but beneath it was a woman shaped by trauma and resilience. She had survived war and loss, but her heart still beat with a fierce desire for freedom. One night, as Bram slept, Alara took out a small carved pendant she had hidden beneath her clothes, a token from her mother, a symbol of hope and strength passed down through generations. It was her anchor in a world that threatened to drown her. When Bram awoke and saw the pendant, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that they were both prisoners of their pasts, bound by pain but yearning for something more. The mountain man and the woman shared a fragile understanding, their fates entwined by bargains made in darkness and secrets whispered in the cold. But the mountain was unforgiving, trust was a luxury they could ill afford, and as the suns grew stronger, so too did the shadows of the past, threatened to unravel the fragile peace between them. Alara knew that the bargain was more than a contract, it was a test of will, a battle for survival that would demand everything they had. The mountain watched silently, waiting for the next move. The mountain's silence was shattered that night by a storm far more violent than the ones that had come before, both outside the cabin and within its walls. Alara sat by the fire, her hands trembling as the flickering flames danced across her face. The bargain that had once been a grim necessity was now a cage tightening around her very soul. Bram's presence was heavier than ever, his watchful eyes shadowed with suspicion and fear. "You've been hiding things from me," Bram growled suddenly, his voice sharp as the thunder outside. "Secrets that could undo everything we've built." Alara's breath hitched. She had hoped the fragile peace between them might hold a little longer, but the mountain was a crucible, and under its pressure, cracks were inevitable. "I did what I had to," she whispered, meeting his fierce gaze. "You think I wanted this bargain? I am no prisoner." Bram, not completely. Bram's jaw clenched, the rage simmering beneath the surface threatening to boil over. "You think you have a choice? Your body belongs to me until my sons stand on their own. Don't forget that." The words stung, but Alara refused to bow. The bargain might have chained her, but it did not break her spirit. Tension spiraled. Days turned into nights filled with silent resentment, and every glance became a battleground. The sons, innocent and unaware, slept peacefully in their cradle while their parents' world threatened to collapse around them. Alara began to plot. Escape was a dangerous thought, a whisper in the storm, but it was the only hope she could cling to. The mountain's vastness was a prison, but also a labyrinth where secrets could be hidden. Bram, sensing the shift, tightened his grip not just on Alara, but on the very cabin that sheltered them. His fear of losing control morphed into something desperate, dangerous. One night, Alara overheard Bram speaking in hushed tones to a shadowy figure outside the cabin, a visitor she hadn't expected. Someone from Bram's past. Someone who carried threats wrapped in old grudges. The bargain was no longer a private torment. It had become a powder keg ready to explode. Alara knew the mountain held more than cold and stone, it held old enemies, buried debts, and the promise of ruin. She would have to decide, fight, flee, or fall deeper into the darkness Bram's world demanded. The breaking point was near, and when it came, nothing would be the same. The night was cold and unforgiving, the mountain wind howling like a beast awakened from slumber. Inside the cabin, the fragile peace that had held for so long shattered like brittle ice underfoot. Alara stood by the door, heart pounding, clutching the small bundle of her son's clothes. The shadowy figure Bram had met days ago lurked just beyond the threshold, a reminder that the past never truly let go. Bram's eyes burned with a fierce desperation. He had always been a man shaped by control and fear, but now the mask cracked, revealing a man torn between rage and something resembling regret. "You can't leave," he snarled. "Not now. Not when the bargain still holds." Alara met his gaze steadily, the years of torment forging a steel resolve. "The bargain ends when my sons are free. Not before. And I am free." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The mountain seemed to hold its breath. The stranger stepped forward, an emissary of the blood feud that had shadowed Bram's family for generations. The old debts, the violence, the betrayals, they all converged in this moment of reckoning. Bram reached for a rifle, but Alara's voice stopped him. "No more blood," she pleaded. "We have a chance to break the cycle." The sons stirred, their cries piercing the tension like a beacon of fragile hope. Bram's hands trembled as he lowered the rifle. For the first time, he saw the mountain not as a fortress, but as a prison for all of them. Together, Alara and Bram faced the stranger, the weight of their pasts pressing down like the snow outside. The bargain, the mountain, the bloodline, they all demanded sacrifice. But now, in the dark, there was a choice: to continue the cycle of pain or to forge a new path. Alara stepped forward, voice steady and clear. "We will end this. Together." The stranger's gaze faltered, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. The mountain was silent again, waiting. Days later, the first rays of spring bathed the peaks in gold. The sons played outside the cabin. Their laughter, a fragile melody against the harsh wilderness. Alara and Bram stood side by side, no longer bound by bargains or fear, but by something harder, hope. The mountain remained, vast and eternal, but beneath its shadow, a new legacy had been born, one forged not by chains but by choice.